Do you remember the first day of your reality show career? Do you remember the first day you walked in? What was it, back in 2000?
I absolutely do. The very first day that I worked in reality television, I was on a reality show called Fear for MTV, and we were at LA Center Studios working in post. I was a logger transcriber, which meant that I was going to basically do transcription of all of the field content for the benefit of the story producers. I showed up to work. I got the immediate glamour dosage as I walked into the elevator, and Jennifer Love Hewitt and the security guard were in the elevator at the studio. Went up to the office, got acquainted with everybody, and the first night that I spent was 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. logging and transcribing footage of people having supernatural encounters in a building in the middle of downtown that was dead empty in the middle of the night. So I spook easily, so it was a rough start, but good people to start with.
So what was your idea of this industry like? You graduated from Full Sail,
Right.
And I think you drove across country.
Right.
So knowing that a lot of it is sort of this grunt work to start out, what was over the next few months, what was your impression of the industry, knowing that this could be my life for a few years?
Mm-hmm. Well, originally I had moved to California thinking that I was going to be a screenwriter, and movies are where it was at, and I had tons of specs written, and I was just going to take meetings and meet people, and this was going to be temporary. Reality television, I came at the perfect time because it was really just sort of being reborn in the format that it's in now. This is 2000. You're talking about, Survivor came out that year. A lot of the key shows that really changed the game came around right as I was here. And I started to realize things like, this is not something that is seasonal. Like, they'll do 1 or 2 seasons of a show a year. You can start in March or you can start in November. Like, why wouldn't I want to work in a business that was year-round instead of worrying about getting a job once a year, and then if I missed staffing or I couldn't sell something, that I would just have to sit at home. And suddenly it started looking really attractive, just from the perspective of a paycheck that didn't quit.
And so did that dream die in terms of wanting those scripts to be made for film or television, for sitcoms? Or did you see a new form of creativity take place with reality TV? How did that shape for you?
The thing that I always tell people about story is anything you know about story can be applied to reality television. It's just that you're sort of retroactively assembling the refrigerator magnets in order to create a coherent story. I had studied very hard, had studied screenplays that worked. I was a big Sid Field devotee, as I still am, and that was how I learned to write. So, adapting that for reality television and understanding what real story has to mimic in order to be interpreted as story, it wasn't that much of a transition for me. And I don't feel that dream died. And outside of the fact that I think that screenwriters and television writers, it's a little sexier, I think. When film students want to get into the business, they're not talking about reality television, even though it's half or more of what's on television. They're thinking about movies and TV shows because there's a perception of glamour that goes with that. The reality is very different, because the only thing that matters in the end is, are your checks clearing? Are you telling stories that you're not embarrassed to tell? Are you building a body of work? And I am doing all of those things in reality television, as are my colleagues. We're just not getting the same buzz. We don't get quite as much attention at the punch bowl at parties.
We had someone on Twitter, I'm not even sure who it was, when we put out there that we would be interviewing with someone who produces reality shows and writes them. And this person wrote back, quote, "Why did you sell out and decide to produce more garbage when there's so many great shows that need to be made? But if the audience is telling you that they want to watch some of this stuff, why do we interpret it as garbage?"
Okay. Here's my answer to that. Reality television, when people are talking about reality television that they perceive to be garbage, they are looking at very specific types of reality television. They are not looking at Anthony Bourdain. They are not looking at Dirty Jobs. They are not looking at shows that are interesting or informative or inspirational. And reality is much bigger than docuseries, docusoaps, and that's all that anybody's talking about when they're talking about producing garbage. Docuseries, docusoaps if you take a look back into the earliest days of television, television from the 1940s into the early 1950s was still very experimental. People were putting plays on television and just shooting them as if they were plays. They were doing all kinds of crazy things and trying to find their footing and trying to find what worked on television. Docuseries, docusoaps have not been around that long, and if you look at it, if we started docuseries, docusoaps, even in the 90s, we're still learning, and there's going to be a lot of product that's not that great. And I would defy anyone who talks about reality television uniformly as garbage to show me 100% of the scripted shows that have gone to air and not identify absolute crap amongst those shows that have aired. Any creative endeavor is very, very hit or miss. There are going to be hits, there are going to be failures, there are going to be shows that catch people's interest and shows that don't. And to claim that reality television is just producing garbage is an extraordinarily narrow view. And while I wouldn't want to take that person on and just call them an antagonist, I would urge them to start watching some more of the things that are on Discovery, on History, watching Anthony Bourdain's shows, watching An Idiot Abroad, which is one of the best shows I've seen on television in years, and just really kind of broadening what their definition of, their understanding of what reality really is.
Do you think then people envision it's sort of the cat fights amongst the women or some of the backbiting that they see and
right.
that as being
well,
what all reality TV is?
I'll tell you, this is a great example, I'm aware of a series that I won't name. The series ran, I think, 14 episodes in a season. There were 2 on-camera physical altercations over the course of the full season, which were not full-on fists. It was just sort of, someone, it was like flipping a table over or like throwing a drink at someone. All that anybody talked about the whole season were those huge explosive moments. I do think that people, when they think of reality television, again, because the more sensational stuff is what grabs headlines, they tend to think of reality in terms of those cat fights, because that's what the networks are choosing to push in the promos. That's what's getting people to watch. It's the loud thing that's going to bring you in. I can go back to when I was much younger and watching TV shows like Dynasty, and here's Joan Collins and Linda Evans wrestling each other into a fountain. And nobody seems to mind if it happens in scripted. But if it happens in an unscripted program, then that's just totally unacceptable.
Right.
Reality TV is much broader than just, people clawing at each other.
Right. I think I saw that episode, by the way.
Yeah, well.
Troy, have you ever sold a reality TV show just as a pitch?
There are reality shows. Usually what I'll do is I'll partner with a production company because I don't have one. And we'll go out and we'll present that show together. Most of the time shows are not bought in the room, although it has been known to happen. There is a producer that I worked for who was on the phone with a major cable network pitching a show that he had been working on for weeks, paused in the middle of the conversation and said, well, how about a show where this happens and that happens? And they liked it so much, this idea, that they committed to the idea on the phone. This doesn't happen a lot. Most of what's happening, especially with people who are mid-career and are not yet captains in the business, Mark Burnett's going to have a very different meeting than I'm going to have. I'm going to meet with someone who's a firewall between the person who's making the decisions and me, whereas Burnett is going to meet with, probably talk to Les Moonves and say, I have another show for you. When you go in with those shows, typically what will happen is you'll have a little bit of back and forth. It doesn't get bought in the room necessarily because they're sort of testing the seaworthiness of the idea to make sure that you have something that's completely saleable. People come in with an idea that's not finished, or a concept for a show that doesn't stand up to questioning, or sometimes the executive might be trying to sort of crush it into the form of something that they need to buy at that time. The example that I always give is if I'm pitching you a show where women are trying to find love and the executive says, well, we just got a sponsor that's a motorcycle company. Can they be trying to find love and be on a motorcycle trip across the country at the time this is happening? It's an exaggerated example, But you're right. The thing that's supposed to happen is you're not supposed to always sell your show. You're supposed to sell a show, a version of your show. So that back and forth is one of the reasons why I don't think that there's always a sale in the room.
Right. I know you talked about in another interview the $1 million napkin, where
Right.
people get this idea, maybe they're having cocktails, and hey, wouldn't this be great?
Right.
So let's say that person is somewhere, maybe they're selling real estate somewhere, they're selling insurance, and they say, I want to pitch a reality show. What are some cliff notes, like just a quick and dirty checklist? And I know you don't
Sure.
like lists, but
No,
like,
no.
oh, okay.
I can give you a checklist.
Okay.
If you're going to pitch a show, the $1 million napkin idea is that everybody thinks that everything's so easy to sell. Like, hey, it's about two guys that work in a junkyard. Well, you've got to understand your talent. So if you are someone who is coming into this cold, if you're pitching a show about an occupation, for example, make sure that you have people selected that are viable cast for this show who have agreed on paper to let you pitch a show about them for a period of time. So that when you walk in the room, even if they don't like the people you have, they see that you are able to put that talent together. It's very hard for someone who is brand new to sell a format. If you were selling a reality competition show or anything where the format is the star as opposed to the talent being the star, you're going to have a very hard time doing that, because there are people who are completely dedicated to creating those types of shows, and you yourself do not bring value to that show as a creator. You have to figure out how to package things out a little bit and to figure out how to add value to yourself. So really think about it. Also, when you go in, be sure you have an idea, especially if you're doing a docu-soap, docu-series. Have an idea of who you want to cast, and also have an idea of where that show could go over a period of 2 or 3 seasons. Just so they know, again, it's it's something that's built to last and there's somewhere to take you, as opposed to showing you a bunch of interesting people who aren't necessarily doing much. And that would be the short checklist. The longer checklist, I think, is making sure that the idea that you have is not only saleable and is in line with a particular network's needs or wants. Don't create a show because you think it would be fun. Create a show that has a buyer in mind. If you want to create a show that's just completely different, and I know because I've learned this from doing it myself, there are shows I'm very passionate about that just don't have a home because no network is carrying the kind of thing that I wanted to do. Don't go into the wrong place, or you've completely torpedoed your relationship with them forever. Is you come in the door with something that is so foreign to their network, you wasted their time. It looks like you don't know what you're doing. It looks like you haven't bothered to look into what they do, and they don't want to see you again.
Wow. So be incredibly prepared, it sounds like.
Be incredibly prepared. Take the time to research the networks that would like to see the kind of programming that you're bringing in. Make sure that you're not creating a show that is cost prohibitive to the point where the example that I often give is, I call it celebrity choir. It's if you had to do a show where every episode a celebrity has to get 20 other celebrities together and form a choir, and you're going to do eight episodes over a season, that's 168 celebrities that you would have to have involved in that show over the season. Now, is celebrity choir a good idea if I just have one celebrity who has to get a group of normal people together and figure out how to lead them as a choir? Sure, because then you have 8 people that you need to cast over the season instead of 168, and suddenly that show is a sellable, doable thing.
Which leads me back to something else I heard you say, that just because maybe your 2 neighbors down the street are totally fascinating, right, and you want to sell this idea about their, right, lives, whatever it is, doesn't mean it's going to fly, that they really do want people that have, right, some kind of a following? Is that
well,
right,
I don't know that that's necessarily true. No? If you are presenting a show and you just have some people who are interesting or have an unusual lifestyle, we have really gotten into, in the last couple of years, shows that are very big on people who have unusual occupations or people who have unusual family dynamics.
Hoarders and things.
Exactly. Those are actually great. So you can sell a show about the folks down the street. The only thing that you've got to do is make sure that there is a way to make sure that there is story that could happen to those people every week. There are people who are interesting, and then there are people that you want to follow. There's a difference. I've had some great conversations with people that are fun to talk to for an hour, but I don't want them in my living room, 15 times a season, not getting much accomplished.
So going back to making sure that there is talent attached, whether it's a big
Right.
name or somebody down the street, what is that exactly? Is that a contract, and what does that look like?
Usually what you'll do is you'll have some sort of an arrangement with your talent that basically says that you have the exclusive right to pitch a show with them attached to it for a specific period of time. For me, typically it's about 120 days at the outside. Some people will do it longer, some people will do it shorter. I think it gives you enough time that you can take it out once, because once it's been around, the idea is kind of exhausted. Once a series has been pitched, word gets around, everybody knows that it's been out. So you've really got one shot to take it somewhere. So 120 days is usually long enough to do it. And basically all you're doing is preventing production companies and other people from doing an end zone run around you and just going directly to your talent and saying, it's great that Fred introduced us, but I think we can do the show without Fred, so why don't you come with me and we'll do the show? And it has been known to happen.
So if someone does have a cast that they want to attach, would you recommend that they see an attorney, or are there do-it-yourself, NOLO press, you can go and get your own
I really
forms?
think that if you are going to do this right, you need to be working with an attorney. There is a cost to doing business the right way. A lot of people want to kind of start up and do their own thing. You can take those chances if your talent is your cousin or your best friend of 20 years.
Maybe.
Exactly. You can roll the dice and hope that they're loyal to you and that it doesn't create a problem. But as with anything, you'll have a difficult time getting in to pitch or to present a lot of the time if you don't have an entertainment attorney or an agency behind you. The real reason for that is, first of all, you need to have people who know what they're doing in order to keep yourself and your concept protected. But moreover, if you don't have an agent or a manager, again, it's the idea that there are firewalls to prevent complete amateurs from just eating up all the possible time in the world with your development staff. They don't necessarily like to be approached directly, so it's just sort of an arbitrary, we don't take submissions unless it's through an agency or through an entertainment attorney. So there's a bar that's then set for entry so that you're not just sort of dragging it off the street. Now there are places online, I don't know what the success rates have been, but there are places online that say, pitch your idea to us. Joke and Biagio, I think, have something that's set up that way with their site.
Oh, great.
And they're great.
Yes, they are.
Producers. They're wonderful people who really love what it is that they do. I wouldn't have any trepidation about presenting to them if I were new. But most people don't provide you with that inroad.
Sure. So it sounds like not just the story idea, but also funds for retainer for an attorney.
Right.
And so you're looking at not going in, hey, in a couple months, I think I'm going to really, it sounds like almost a year or more in planning this out.
It's possible, but I will also tell you that in working with an attorney, there is a way that you can work with an attorney that doesn't require a lot of money up front. If you have an idea and you're working with an entertainment attorney, or wanting to work with an entertainment attorney rather, there are people who will make your deal for you in exchange for 5% of your show.
Okay.
So that you're not paying fees up front, but you're going to be paying for it for the rest of the run of the show if it actually sells. Lots of entertainment attorneys that I know do work that way. So it is an alternative, but it is a lot of money out of your pocket in the long run compared to paying someone a few $100s an hour to do it right.
Let's take a different approach from something that you're more into sort of the story formation and producing the show. But what if someone comes to LA and wants to be a reality star?
Okay.
What do they have to have? What do they need to do? What are some of the things?
Well, it's not too hard to get on a reality show if you live in Los Angeles because they're casting around the clock. They'll post often on Craigslist. People will actually recruit for reality shows. You'll see people just approaching people in public places and saying, hey, have you ever thought about blah, blah, blah? What you need to know going into it is if you're on tape or you're asked to submit something, be yourself. Don't be a cartoon version of yourself to be interesting. I have almost never seen that work. There are times where it has worked, but it's been very rare. The real you is who they want to see. and they may ask you for a heightened version of yourself, where if I talk nonstop about a particular subject, they'll say, okay, when you get on the show, just talk about it a lot. Another thing you should really know getting into reality shows is that reality stars do not make a tremendous amount of money. When you start a reality show, there are a lot of people that will be paid stipends of maybe $500 a week to be on a show. There are major celebrities that I have seen on shows who might get $3,000 an episode. That is something that's done in addition to their normal life. Trying to make a living as a reality star is pretty tough. Now, when you get into the second or third or fourth or fifth season of a show, there's a little bit more money there, and you have some leverage, and you can say, well, you know, the few years that I got on the show are up, or the few years of my initial contract are up, now let's renegotiate. And that's where you start to hear about things like the Duck Dynasty guys want more money, or the housewives of blank want, you know, more money. That people are starting to push for that. What you need to know as a reality star is that there is a brief window of time where you are going to be exposed to a lot of people. It is not a career. Don't chase it, because you're going to last 5 to 7, 8 seasons on a show that's really hot, and then you're going to disappear. There's going to be nothing. So it's all about trying to figure out how to capitalize on the experience of having been on a show. You look at people like Bethany Frankel and what she was able to do as a result of having camera time and being out there. She was really hustling and pushing her own product and doing her thing, and was able to build an empire. Most people in reality shows don't do that. I will tell you that there's an agent with a major agency that I had spoken to once about reality shows as far as the representation for reality stars. His take was, you know, every year a show like Big Brother will come out, and there will be a huge cast of people that all decide that they want to be represented when the show ends. It was like, well, what do you do? Well, I'm the chick with the blue hair. What do you do? Well, I'm the chick with the blue hair on Big Brother, and you know, I'm kind of famous because I'm on Big Brother. There's nowhere for them to take you. There's nothing for them to do with you. Managers and publicists are the people who will be handling you, trying to figure out how to help you capitalize on your fame. But it's up to you to figure out what to make of the time you have on the show in order to make it count, or just realize that it's something that you do for the fun of being involved in it. There are no, I shouldn't say no, there are very few lasting stars coming out of reality. Nene Leakes is the exception, not the rule.
Any advice for people post-reality stardom? How do they assimilate back into, quote, normal life? Or maybe that's one of the things they have to realize, is that it's always going to follow them?
I think that if you have some level of notoriety for being a pain, or being somebody who's kind of like the character that's always sort of jabbing at people, if that's what you have a reputation for, that's very hard to shake. And it can follow you into a job. It can follow you into your life where people just perceive you as the person that you've been on the show. I know some people personally that has happened to. But most people who are on reality shows, unless there's a super negative thing surrounding you, can assimilate back into normal life fairly easily. You might get a hello at the grocery store, hey, weren't you on so-and-so? But there's so much content out that people don't really, it's not something that lasts a long time, and you just have to have a mindset going into it that this is something that I want to do because it'll be fun, it'll be an adventure for me.
But it's not a career move, it's like a 1%.
It's not a career move. If you have a very specific agenda, if you're going on a show like Project Runway, or you're going to do a show where it's about your talent or your skill or your ability, and your talent or skill or ability is showcased on that show, that's slightly different. You'll be, you may be approached by people after that. There are crazy opportunities that are afforded to you while you were on the shows that just don't tend to last. You get paid to open a nightclub. Just show up and wave at people and say hello and let's get this party started, and then you're in a car and you're gone. There are crazy things that can happen to you while you're on the show, but it's not something that's designed to last.
Troy, of the many shows that you've been involved with,
Mm-hmm.
which is the one that taught you the greatest lesson about this industry, and what was it?
I'd have to say that if I look back over everything that I've done in 20 plus, yikes, series now, Flipping Out probably is the best example of a fully rounded cast and a well-integrated story. I've been really, really just exceptionally proud of that show. I did one season. I did the very first season, and the tone that we were able to set, the cast was wonderful. I mean, they're still some of my favorite people to watch. But what I learned about that is how to give people that three-dimensional feeling that you know a character. You're not just selecting the content that is the loudest or the noisiest or the most explosive. You have, again, highs and lows and peaks and valleys, and that's how you tell a story. You can't just be constantly hammering people with noise. And that's followed me forward. It's helped me through Basketball Wives. It's helped me through lots of the shows that I've done. Most of the time I'm involved with the show a little bit during production remotely, because I tend to work from a post position where I'm sort of forensically putting story together based on what's come in from the field and trying to make sense of what's been shot. Flipping Out was the best toolkit I could have possibly ever had to put that together. As far as sheer learning experiences, the Osbournes. I was working as a dailies coordinator for them. That basically I was supporting the story department. If you go to IMDb and you look up the people who were in the story department on that show, you have Sue Kalinsky, who is an incredible writer. You have Henriette Mantel, who's a great comic performer in addition to being a great writer. You have Jeff Stilson, who had worked on the Ali G show. You have Melanie Graham, who was running the whole story department, who had written for SNL and some other things. These are all people who understand story and humor and how to dig it out of that material. And I learned, it was like going to college working with that bunch. So it's kind of a split. I learned a lot from Flipping Out, but I learned a lot from the Osbournes as well.
Going back to this three-dimensional character, you don't have to name who the characters were, but in terms of talking about three dimension, is that the high, the mid, and then the absolute low?
Right.
Can you give
Sure.
examples of just generic versions of what you might show?
Well, let me tell you this. Let's look at your life.
Oh, boy.
Or let's look at my life, because I'm terribly narcissistic. In my life, I have maybe one day a month where I lose my temper in any way that anyone would notice that I was upset. And even then, I get what I jokingly call parenthetically upset. If someone's like, "Are you mad?" Because I can almost tell that you're mad. Most of the time, I'm pretty mellow, and then maybe once a month, I'll get really emotional about something and get down. Those three things are all different parts of my character. If I condense those moments down into a show where you're seeing that happen to me over the course of 30 minutes or an hour, you start to feel that I have a range of emotions that can be displayed, that I am not just the guy who is the bad boss or the guy who is the wacky, fun person to be around. You're getting an idea that I have a very rich personal life. If you see me reacting in many different ways to things in a span of a half an hour or an hour, you start to get the idea that I have a richness to my character, that I have an emotional range. If you only see me on a show as I'm the oppressive boss, I'm the ditzy underling, I'm the guy who bumbles around and never gets anything right, you might as well be watching traditional comedies where people tend to be pigeonholed and those archetypes are more prevalent. I won't say that reality shows don't have types. I won't say that we don't say, well, we're looking for the rock star and the virgin and the this and the that they often cast that way to get those things. But when you show those characters, you've got to let them have that range of emotion, or people don't believe that they're real. You can't invest in someone who is in one state all the time.
So speaking of which, what are the archetypes that are on most reality shows? The character archetypes.
Well, I'll tell you, the character archetypes in reality shows vary. It's very broad. There are certain things, like when you watch The Real World is the best way to sort of understand, how they cast. If you look at those shows, it's the cowboy, the rich kid. Like, everybody is just, this is exactly who I am. I'm the crazy drunk. I'm the person who has, deep-rooted issues. I'm the social activist. And they'll try to build things around those people so that they can showcase the things that they're passionate about, because that's where their energy comes through. But as far as archetypes go, there are zillions of them in reality television. You cast for them with an eye towards conflict. They don't tend to cast people to get along. They cast people so that there will be some sort of discussion or disagreement, because that is where dramatic action happens. Fantastic example of that, The Surreal Life Season 2. They had Ron Jeremy, who is an adult film star, and they had Tammy Faye Baker, who was, of course, is the famous televangelist. And they put them in a house together because they were sure that they would butt heads about something. And them developing a friendship over the course of that season was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen in a reality show. It was really fun to watch them get to know each other, and for him to know when not to push her, and for her to realize that she needed to be a little bit accepting of him, and it all worked out in the end. But that's why I say, people have to change over the course of a season and develop the same way that they do in scripted content, that it all has to go somewhere. Just the state of being is not enough.
So then it's not so much that someone's cast as the villain, it's in terms of what is their hot button, what is their Achilles heel that they know somebody pokes them with it, they're going to explode, and it's going to create conflict.
Sure. Well, when you're applying to be on a reality show, usually you'll get your little form, and it'll say, the thing that most embarrassed me when I was younger was this. My biggest fear is blah. I can almost guarantee you that if you fill out my biggest fear is spiders, somewhere in that season, a tarantula is going to show up, or there's going to be you might have an encounter with a spider. Or if you say the thing that embarrassed me most was, I was a lousy surfboarder in a surf town or whatever, maybe there's going to be a challenge that year where you have to be on a surfboard. They try to find out those things about you so they know what they can do to bring your personality out. It's working towards bringing the person's personality. It's not done maliciously. It's done so that we can see who you are and what makes you tick in a more defined way.
How should a reality show producer deal with their editor?
Reality show producers and editors, it's been a long-standing sort of an uneasy alliance in some cases, because editors very often feel that the responsibility for the show lies with them. Story producers sometimes feel the show lies with them, and different companies support the notion that the editor is more important than the story producer, and others that the story producer is more important than the editor. I think that everybody's on equal footing, because a great idea can come from anywhere. And if you've ever worked on a show with me, the way that I deal with editors is I'll go into the room, I'll pass along whatever my rough string out of the material is, or if we're really blazing ahead and we don't have time for me to do a string out, that I'll give them the notes and say, these are the things that are most important to accomplish in this scene. This is what it should look like. This is the texture. This is what it should feel like. And then I leave. And I wait for the editor to have something to show me. There are other producers who will sit in the back of the room on a laptop and eat their lunch and call their friends and do whatever it is. Editors hate that. Being watched drives them bananas. It takes longer because they're constantly stopping and going back to show something to you again. And they really don't need you to say, can you back that up 3 frames? Can you do this? Can you do this? That's what a notes pass is for later. So I would suggest to any story producer, one of the best things you could do, and if you want to build a relationship with an editor, is know how to give them information to be available to them and to get out of the way. Because what that also does is it frees you up to work on the material for them that's coming after what you've just given them. In order to run a show efficiently, you have to always be a few steps ahead of your editing staff, and you can't be if you're sitting behind them in the room, watching them make cuts and basically operating them like a remote control.
What if you have a tendency to micromanage? Then how would you handle that?
There are people who have a tendency to micromanage. Some editors don't mind so much and are a lot more collaborative. It's very rare to have someone who says, boy, I sure wish I could find somebody who is just going to loom over me every second while I'm putting this together. Micromanagers, what they should realize is that you're going to blow deadlines if you're not letting people move forward at an appropriate pace. I understand that you may be responsible for a show. I understand that something may be very important to you to be able to get this done the way you see it or you have the vision for the show. But you've got to allow people to run the ball a little bit before you correct them, because it tends to create a little bit of animosity, especially when you're working with people who are already established and accomplished and have done well. If you're micromanaging a team that's fairly green, I get it. But if you've got an editor that's been working for 20 years and a story team that's been working for 10 to 15, you don't need to be double checking their work before it even happens.
And you say that writers should know how to edit with Avid or Final Cut Pro or Adobe.
We've gotten to the point where even in just the few years since my book has been out, we've really moved towards a thing where my story producers tend to have access to an Avid now, as opposed to using Pilotware or some of the other review things that we used to use, some of the other software where we would be able to review the material and then create a paper edit that we would then pass on to the editors that they would assemble. Now we're just on Avids putting together rough cuts of the scenes ourselves. If you want to be in reality television as a story producer, you absolutely must have a basic working knowledge of Avid or Final Cut Pro at this stage of the game, because you will be asked to do those string outs for the editors. You'll be asked to go through material to find support content for those editors, and if you don't know how to use those, you're dead. It's just another tool. The typewriter gave way to the computer, and the computer gave way to the Avid.
Troy, how far are you into production before you go into post and start putting the story together?
It varies on the type of show that you're doing. There are shows that shoot an episode to a format in just 2 or 3 days, and there are docuseries, docusoaps where you're in the field for a total of 4 months, 5 months shooting a show. Typically what will happen on a docuseries or a docusoap is you'll shoot for 3 or 4 weeks in the field just to get a feel for what's happening, to get your cast used to the camera. And when you start seeing story come together, that's when it's time to go back to post. So usually it's a few weeks after you've started production. At a minimum, maybe 2 weeks, and then at the most you'd want to wait maybe 4 or 5. What that enables us to do is to go back to post and start putting the stories together to see if the stories that we're following are really holding water based on the content that we've got. If something's not working out, there's still time to call the field and say, listen, this story is dead because everybody is very low energy when they talk about it. I don't feel that there's any real interest there. We've got to dig something else out of them. But again, just that short lead, just maybe 2 to 4 weeks of shooting in the field before you get to post is helpful.
So if there is a story idea, let's suppose a couple is going to have dinner, how much is something really structured? Is it going to be where, great, they're going to have dinner, but little things will happen that are going to be unexpected? I mean, how much are you actually really crafting that story?
Well, reality television, this is the thing, is I always say story is story and story is written. When you're going in, if I have a dinner scene, I'm following you to dinner, but I might say at the beginning of it, listen, over the course of this dinner, would you mind talking about what happened on Thursday and where you think that's going to go? And also, if you have any plans coming up in the next 2 or 3 weeks, can you just discuss the things that are coming up so that we can make sure that we have a starting point for the things that are coming up? And it's very organic and very natural, and someone just says, oh yeah, we got to talk about this. So we're thinking about going out to the cabin next weekend. I don't know if you want to come with us. It starts a lot of conversation that leads somewhere. 2 people hanging out together very often have a lot of non sequitur conversation that isn't always useful. So if you have a couple of objectives for every scene, it's a little bit different than saying, I'm going to put these words in your mouth, say this thing I'm telling you to say, but you definitely need to seed it in order to be able to get useful content back a lot of the time.
So you're giving them an idea, and then those people, whoever they are with their personality, and they're bringing it up in their own manner.
Correct.
Okay, interesting. And then you also talk about sort of walk-ins and walk-offs. Can you talk about how you orchestrate those and where you need them?
Well, I'll tell you, anytime that you're in a new location, especially if it's a place that you're not normally at, take a little bit of time, even if you don't think you'll use it in post, to shoot a walk-up, a person arriving at that location and going in. And also when a person leaves, make sure that you track them to the door. You can find natural in and out points during conversations and interactions. I much prefer those to the walk-ins and walk-outs. But as surely as you don't shoot it, you're going to wish you had it, because sometimes something has to be explained. Like, I was very upset with Jennifer and I didn't know what I was going to say to her, but I just knew as soon as I got to the restaurant that I had to do something. Just so we know what's going to happen in the scene. Any setup that you need for a scene has to play over something. And a person walking up and grabbing the door handle of the restaurant is the easiest thing in the world to shoot. And it gives you enough time that you have an interview bite that you can play against that to set up your scene before something actually starts.
How many times has this happened where you have a story idea, you have two people carrying it out, and it takes a totally different direction? Or does that happen all the time?
It happens all the time. When you go out into the field with a plan, you're inviting the universe to say, fine, you have a plan, here's something else. You can't predict human interaction accurately. You can imagine what's going to happen. When you go out in the field, a lot of the time you'll have a plan for the week, and you'll say, well, Monday we're going to go here, Tuesday we're going to do this, Thursday we're going to do this. You have a light idea of what people should be talking about and what's moving forward. And as sure as you do that, someone's going to say, my daughter's getting ready to drop out of college. I got to get on the phone with her and talk about it. It's not anything you ever imagined you were going to talk about. And it's not something that you saw as a story. But this is the other reason why, when you are in the field, you need to be able to adapt and be able to follow the stories that are really happening, in addition to or in place of whatever the plans are that you had. The best stuff is the stuff that you don't expect. It's always better if you don't expect it.
We talk about choosing the, quote, characters. Let's suppose they aren't a big name, but they're very interesting people that have a story that's going to go somewhere.
Right.
Who are you choosing? The ones you know will bring the most conflict, the most fascinating to watch?
You're looking for, I talked about casting for conflict where you have personalities that are a little bit different, that you assume that they might rub up against each other in the wrong way. I think it's also important to have, when you cast people, to bring their friends in so that they have a confidant or someone that they can get away to. If I did a show and it was just you and me, it would be a terrible show. And the reason why is because everything that either one of us said would be taken at absolute face value. If I have my best friend, you and I can have a conversation, and then I can go to a scene where I just say, listen, I just had this interview and they asked me all these terrible questions about reality television, and I put on my brave face for her, but I'm so embarrassed and I'm so worried that this is going to get cut funny and I'm going to look like a moron, or that some old producer is going to see it and think I'm talking about him. And then I have a scene, and then I have a show, because now I have something to worry about, and I don't have to express every thought that I have to you. So yeah, there's casting for conflict, but you also need to make sure that you're filling your cast and rounding it out with characters who will support each other and really just sort of be there for the purposes of having those side conversations.
And you said earlier that it's very rare that, well, maybe more so now, that you'll cast sort of the everyday Joe off the street. What are those characters? You said that someone that has a story that's going to go someplace. So how do we know their story is actually going to go someplace?
Well, here's the thing. If you're casting someone, make sure that that person has something that's going on in their life, that they have a goal or a vision or an objective for themselves, that they're at a transitional point in their life that's really important to follow, where you're anticipating change or you're anticipating action to be happening in your life. If I have two people together and one person really wants to be on a reality show, and she can play the guitar a little bit, and she has a dog. And the other person comes on, and they can play guitar a little bit, and they have a dog, but also they have this kind of weird adversarial relationship with their mother who doesn't really want them to be a singer because they don't think it's a very good thing. All of a sudden that person becomes three-dimensional, and I start thinking about how are we going to get the mother into it? Like, how will we bring the mother into the show? Or the worry about what mom thinks. And then I can see that going somewhere over the course of a season. Like, that person might have to make a decision later about whether or not she can stay in LA because her mother's going to cut her off and not support her, and she might have to go home, and then you start thinking about all the things that could happen.
Or get a job, yeah.
Or get a job.
I see the most fascinating emails come through from InfoList.
Mm-hmm.
For I love to just read, looking for,
Right.
and what is it like being at one of those casting calls? I mean, I know it's whittled down to many different levels of it, but
I don't work a lot directly with casting. Most of the time the casting is done by the time I get to the show. There are periods where I have interacted with cast members before they've been cast to sort of suss out, just give my 2 cents as far as who I think will work and who won't. To be in the room for those sorts of castings, the best thing that you can do as a producer is to facilitate allowing that person to be themselves. And that means be cordial, talk to them about things, calm them down, be direct with them, let them know that when you're doing a reality show, that it's not just about us following you, that, once in a while we may ask you specifically, can you have a dinner with this person and talk about a couple things? Sort of lay that groundwork, because if people aren't informed very well, then you have a very difficult shoot period where you have 2 or 3 weeks at the top where people are just realizing that this isn't what they thought it was going to be. At those castings, you have to really prepare people for what the process is so that they can make an informed decision about being on the show. Because if they're miserable, they'll clam up, and if they clam up, you've got real problems.
do you ever have plants in the room? And I'm not talking palms.
And by plants in the room, you mean?
Decoys, people that are listening, to see if somebody's really that person, or are they, once they get in that boardroom?
I think that the people who do the best jobs of casting reality shows can pick a personality apart on their own without any help. They really know how to judge a genuine response. They really know when someone is the person that they're coming to you as. You know, what you don't want is the guy that comes in and is like, hey, I'm wild and I'm crazy and I'm whatever. And then the cameras turn on and he's like, oh, I don't want to embarrass myself. You don't want that. And anybody who's really good at casting has seen that person a million times, who could turn it on for an audition and just in an inauthentic way, and then just can't possibly sustain it for a period of 8 to 12 weeks while you shoot the show.
Well, in your book, you have a chapter from Scanning on Amazon about reluctant subjects.
Yes.
How do you bring them out of their shell, or maybe there's no way around it?
There are a few ways to deal with a reluctant subject, and it always revolves around what it is they're so worried about. There are people who think that, well, you know, this show isn't going the way I thought. I thought this was going to be a show about how amazing I am and how I'm starting a business and how I have all of these things going on for myself. People have an agenda when they come in. And if those people aren't getting their needs met as far as meeting their agenda, they're going to start clamming up and wondering what it is you're trying to do with them, and they're going to embarrass me, and this is going to happen. You can't allow it to get to that point. And even if that means, let's try and figure out a storyline that does what it is you want. You want to show us that you're a good mom. You know what? Let's do something, and we'll do a 3-beat story with you and your kids going somewhere. We'll figure out some way to accommodate that, even if it never makes it into the show. You know, to do that in good faith and to work with your cast and try to help them feel comfortable will get them over the reluctancy to appear on camera. Everybody needs a little bit of help and a little bit of encouragement, and most of all, information through the process. You can't just starve them for information.
What about if there needs to be something something needs to be addressed? Let's suppose they want to see it one-dimensional, where they're just this great person or a star,
right.
But really there's a reality there where there's some serious holes and things for
right.
them. How do you deal with that?
The conversation that I've had to have a few times is, I talk a lot about that. If you see in the book, I talk about self-producers, which is an extension of the reluctant subject. A person who is self-producing, again, has that agenda that they want to show you the one side and they don't think it's coming across, so they're going to shut down. Self-producers, you need to let them know that you are trying to hit broad story with them. Like, I need something that's going to translate to what's out there. And also, if you start putting on a phony persona on the show, you can't maintain it for months. You're going to crack at some point, and what's going to happen is you're going to look really unauthentic. Like, if you have one character on your show who just has to be seen as the goody two-shoes, just has to. Like, oh, I don't want people to know that I'm nasty or mean, or that I get into fights like any other normal human being would. And all you ever do is cut to shots of them going, oh my, and you never show the 2 hours of them mixing it up and getting into the argument and getting passionate about something. The audience knows when you're holding material back from them. And those self-producers are going to do themselves in and look like phonies. And there's nothing that anybody hates more in reality TV than someone who's being inauthentic.
How do you think the audience can tell, though, that there's maybe certain cuts that have been held back? Suppose, let's take the goody two-shoes. So,
sure.
Oh my, and oh, isn't this person great and all this stuff, but really then they're backbiting and doing all this stuff behind the scenes.
Right.
How does this audience know this?
The audience knows it because it's not a reaction that you would have to what was actually happening in front of you. If I see two people fighting in front of me, I'm not going to say, oh my, I'm probably going to yell at them, you guys, knock it off, or get involved to the point where I'm meeting the energy level of what's happening in the room. When I have to use a cutaway of you, from 5 minutes before or 5 minutes after, just like, oh, because you're not going to cooperate with me if I make you look bad.
Gotcha. Okay.
Then you're going to look inauthentic in the final product, and people are not going to relate to you, and you're not going to have a chance to break out or be someone who returns for a subsequent season.
Does the character have to be liked to be brought back?
I think a character has to be liked or absolutely despised to come back. And in order to create a villain, by the way, that is likable in their way, there's no such thing as somebody who is all bad or all good. You have to show the little cracks, you have to show the vulnerability, you have to show what's motivating that person to do what it is that they're doing. No one in reality shows is just 100% awful 100% of the time, because you'd get tired of watching them. And it just, turns into a Lucy sketch where somebody is just all one thing. It's like, I'm the blustery bank manager, or, that nobody is that. Everybody is on some level, motivated by whatever it is that's driving them. I'm making no sense right now.
No, I get it, because you're talking about this three-dimensional character. So they can't, their resting state is not always blustering and bemoaning something.
Well, that's the thing, is your villains your villains, just like your heroes, just like any participants in the show, have to have multiple dimensions. Otherwise, you don't buy into them, you don't understand. You look at the great villains in scripted. They're motivated by something. They could be motivated by greed, but they could also be motivated by, this thing happened to me 15 years ago and now I want revenge, even though it might not be, you're a terrible person who's exacting revenge, but at least we know what's motivating you. You have to have the same thing for a villain in reality shows.
We talk about stammerers and ramblers. You have a chapter on that.
Yeah, I talk about stammerers and ramblers from a perspective of, when you're doing interviews, there are people who are so quick to give you an answer because they want to help you that they give you a third of what it is you need to hear. They say, hey, listen, yesterday Jeff and I went to the, well, here's what happened. We all went to this place, and then the guy said, wait a minute, no, let me tell you how this works. And it's because they're trying to please you by giving you an immediate answer. Or there are people who just kind of fly all over the place and give you a 3-minute long answer to every question. If you want somebody to be focused and you want to handle a stammerer or a rambler, what you do is you say, listen, I'm afraid I don't want our voices to overlap because we have to be able to edit this. So I'm going to ask you the question, just mentally, just give yourself like a count of 3 and then answer my question. That way we don't have to worry about my voice getting over yours. You would be amazed at what 3 to 5 seconds will do for the way a person thinks. It's like when you're buffering a video. It takes a little bit of time to get ahead of what's playing. And then all of a sudden you start getting reasonable, well thought out responses. They don't stammer, they don't ramble, and you get much better content in the end from them.
That's great. And what about people that are too on for the camera and you need them to be in that resting state?
I very rarely tell anyone to be less energetic in an interview. There are some people who are really putting it on. And those you have to reel back a little bit and say, like, listen, I'm just asking you a question. But most of the time your real problem is getting people to sound like they're passionate about something that happened 2 weeks ago. It's like, explain how the situation happened to me. Well, we went to the restaurant and then we did this and that. Well, first of all, don't look at the floor, look at me. And then just like, you were excited then. Like this really meant a lot to you. And really try to figure out how to get them into that moment so they're talking about it as if it's fresh in the memory. And you just give them a little bit of energy and let them know when they're slacking and when they're down. Because most people want to look good on camera. I always tell them, I'm like, you're going to look very low energy and we'll probably have to come back and ask you again, if the content doesn't work out well.
I know also you said something very fascinating, that although you love associating with the people that you work with, in terms of the talent, you feel that it's better that you don't know them as sort of the people that they are in their real lives.
Right. One of the reasons why, especially if you're doing story and you're mostly working in post, what I have to work with and what I can present to you is the image of a person as it has come through the lens onto a tape and has been presented to me. If I get to know you and I hang out with you, or we're friends, or we get buddied up, there are a couple of things that can go wrong. One is I can start to get a perception of you based on actually interacting with you that may be contrary to what's coming through the lens, where you're putting on a bit of a show for me, as you do sometimes when you meet people and you want to be nice and fun and impressive because that person is important to the process or whatever. If you're trying to be on your best behavior with me and then I see you behaving strangely on camera, it throws me off. That I don't know how to present you authentically, and I start thinking that I'm missing something, or there's something that should be there that isn't, and I just feel weird about it. So to keep that little bit of a wall up, there are field teams and field crews and producers who work specifically with the talent, that if there's something that I need, I'll just drop them an email and say, can you ask them if they would do this or that or the other, or how do they feel about this? And that way I get to be kind of the distant, sometimes the bad guy. And and the field has someone to blame it on and say, listen, they really want this in post. I know you don't want to do it, but they need it to be able to tell this story. I don't mind being put in that position because it's in better service of the story to have that person think, that I'm the bad guy who wants them to do X, Y, or Z, than for me to have an interaction with them where they have my phone number or they can drop me an email directly and say, listen, I have a question about this. I will tell you, I worked on a show once where the show was airing while we were still finishing the final episodes. It was a very compressed schedule. One of the stars of that show, I ran into them at a grocery store. And the guy basically says to me, hey, you're making me look like an asshole. And I basically told him, it's because I can't use footage of you sleeping. It's just you're constantly grading on everyone. I have to use what it is that I have. It's that thing where they think that somehow how you process that is how you're painting them. When in fact, all you're really doing, if you're a competent story person, is eliminating the seams and trying to show that person in the state that they were in when they were being filmed. And that means, warts and all, you're going to be who you were during the period of time that you were being shot.
I.e. a heightened version of yourself.
Exactly. Well, it's a distillation. It's like I talk about it like concentrated orange juice. Is if I only do 3 big things over the course of a month, and then you see all of them happen in a half-hour span, it looks like I'm really this person or that person or the other, because that's what is happening that's story related. The stuff where you're sleeping or you're calling your mom just to say hi and it has nothing to do with the show, that's not of use to me. I can't use it to tell a story. So people just have to get used to the idea that there is a heightened reality version of themselves that comes from that distillation. And that's where you get people who get very upset, because if they're naturally antagonistic, they're going to look really antagonistic in the end. All reality TV can make you look like is more of what you already are. I can't take a great person and make them look like a terrible person. I can't take a terrible person and make them look like a great person. And that's paraphrasing J.D. Roth, who had said that originally, is you can't make a person more of something. And I've always remembered hearing that statement. It was about almost 10 years ago now that he was interviewed for something. And it really stuck with me.
So when that happened, was that around the time when you realized, okay, it's probably a good idea to remove myself?
Yeah,
for various reasons.
I just think that giving yourself a little bit of distance between yourself and your subject prevents them from feeling like they have some sort of retroactive input into, some action that they took. It's not in my interest to ever make a person look bad. You should never look like, I don't throw people under the bus. I don't create a situation that didn't happen. It's been known to happen in reality shows where they paint an inaccurate picture or they ask for interview content where benign footage suddenly looks like it's a really damning indictment of you based on what someone else is saying about you over the footage. I don't like to see those things happen. I think that anybody who is nice enough to want to play ball and be part of a reality show should be treated with respect as a person who is participating in your program. But bad things can happen.
Sure.
I'm not going to actively seek you out. There's nothing that I benefit from by making you look bad.
Let's just talk about salaries for reality shows.
Of course.
From behind the scenes, what
I would tell you, as you come into reality television, if you start as a logger transcriber, you start as a PA, you start at any entry-level position, you're probably looking at between, depending on the company, $450 and $850 a week. I don't see a lot of 450s anymore, but it does still happen. As you move up into an assistant story producer position, or sometimes referred to as an associate producer position, you could be looking at $850 to possibly $1250 as a story producer. This is per week. This is not an hourly, like $8.50. This is
sure, yeah.
As you move into a full story position, you're looking at maybe super low end $900, $950, up to about $1,500 or $1,800 as a story producer. Sometimes as much as $2,000, but it's very rare. Senior story positions, $1,800 to $2,500. Supervising producer positions, again, probably $2,000 to $3,000 or a little bit more. Get up to a supervising producer co-EP level, $3,000 to maybe $4,500
a week.
Mm-hmm. And when you're in EP, it's pretty broad. I mean, I've seen executive producers, depending on their level of participation in the show, making $10,000 a week or more. It can happen. Most of the time it's a little more grounded, between maybe 5 and 8.
Where do people find these jobs?
Here's the thing, reality positions, you don't really start as a story producer. You've got to figure out a way into the company. And it's one of the few writing and creative positions where it's still very much an apprenticeship. You're going to learn by doing in a lower position, and you're going to work your way up to that. Which is why a lot of people come to me that are in their 40s or 50s and saying, well, I've been a writer for this, I want to cross over to reality television. No, it's very rare. You're going to have to start at the bottom. There are some people who have been able to cross over. Very early in my career, I worked with a writer named Steve Rosenfield. Steve had some experience writing for Jon Stewart, had written for The Daily Show. He was able to cross over fairly easily. Some scripted people, Lamar Damon is another guy who plays both sides of the fence. He was the creator of Bunheads for ABC. but he vacillates back and forth between reality and the other. But unless you are very successful on the other side of the fence already, it's a difficult jump. You don't really come in the middle. You start at the beginning.
So let's take a hypothetical 41-year-old male who's done some television sitcom writing, comes in for an interview, and he may have to take that lowest rung job. How should that person present themselves?
Well, let me tell you, it depends on the type of show. If you're doing something that's very heavily formatted, where that person's comedy experience is useful, if I'm doing a show where I'm doing a hidden camera prank show where we're pranking your parents, that person's going to be very valuable to that show because they have a sense of humor and they will figure out a way to work with you. That is a good example of when you are able to jump the fence. If you were 41 years old and you had no experience whatsoever, right, that's when you're in a bit of a pickle because you don't automatically, by virtue of being 41, have any advantage over someone who's 25.
Right.
It's not an ageism thing. It's just experience is what experience is.
So let's suppose it's a person that's a little bit more seasoned in their life and they're coming in for an interview. They know they're going to have to take a lower position. What's their demeanor like in terms of, do they want to come in incredibly humble or come in with, oh, I know this too? What's their resume look like? Are they even bringing a resume? What are some of the tips?
If you're brand new and you're mid-career or jumping from some other career into reality television, again, it's like writing, it's like anything else. No one owes you anything. You don't get to start in the middle because of your age. Your attitude coming in should always be, and I don't care how experienced you are, actually, if it's me, if I were on a show and I were coming in to interview as a co-executive producer with the executive producer, I have the same demeanor. I want you to have a good show. I want to make sure I'm a good fit for you. Let's talk about what I can do that benefits you and how this is going to work. Television, like anything else, is collaborative. I really discourage anyone who thinks they're going to change the world from the standpoint of being an auteur. Television is not for you. Film is not for you unless you're financing it yourself. There are too many people putting up too much money and too many people whose jobs and livelihoods depend on this end product for you to be saying, well, it can't be that way because I envision it this way. And I do run into people who work in reality television who are, who might have come in a bit late in the game, who think that they have an advantage because of their age or having written something else, that are very set in how they believe this is going to be done. And it ends up creating problems for everybody, and they don't end up lasting at the companies. It's all about being able to do these things as a team. But you also have to be verbal when you do have an idea. You can't just kind of roll with it. You can't just recede into the wallpaper and just say, okay, I'll do it the way you want it. You have to be able to present an idea, but you can't present an idea as if your idea is the only possible out.
So what's an interesting way to do that? What's a way to say, you know what, I have just this idea, just maybe I could just run it by you, instead of, no guys, this is the way it's supposed to be done? I mean, there's a fine line? Let me give you an example with the impossible note. I have an executive who says, maybe, we really want to see more of this person talking about this particular subject and them being passionate about this thing. In reality, that person may have only brought it up in one scene. There's nothing to set it up with. The only way you can do anything is with an interview. So when you come back and you're offering that idea or that solution, you could say, well, if I do an interview bite here, I can go back into this other scene and talk about something that's tangentially related to it, so at least it seems like it's introduced earlier, so it's not so much of a shock, and then you don't feel like it's happening. That's a solution to a problem because it's addressing the thing that's bothering the person who's giving you the note. You're trying to figure out how to work with what it is you actually have. If I just said, no, it won't work because we don't have any of that, that's not a solution. If I'm not offering a solution, I'm not helping. If you can't offer solutions on a regular basis from a story perspective, you shouldn't be in reality television. Because just saying, no, I don't, no, I can't. I've never said no to a network note. Never. Is if a network note comes in, I'll say, I've reviewed it and I don't have the material to support it,
but maybe we can do X, Y, or Z. Or I've reviewed it, there is no way to accomplish it. Or this didn't happen this way, I don't really see a way out of it. It always comes back to a discussion. You know, I'm going to offer a solution. If I don't have a solution, then tough for us, but at least I didn't just reflexively tell you no.
Right. So let's take that same 41-year-old guy and say that he does get the job and he's starting at the very sort of bottom of the totem pole. How is he conducting himself on a daily basis while he's there?
I think there are certain things that you need to do when you start, especially if you're a little bit older, and that is to sort of declare your intention, which is, I'm really hoping to move into story. Anything you guys have that could help me out. I mean, if you're 41, it's quite likely that you might have a mentor who's 27. Just get over it. Just get over it. There are people that come into this business all the time. I'm 43. Some of the best people I've worked with are in their mid-20s because they have a fresh perspective, and they also were raised on the stuff that I'm making. I wasn't raised on reality television. I came into it and learned as I went. So these are people who you just learn the language from watching it. And they have wonderful ideas, and because it's collaborative, I don't have room to be prideful. I just have, I'm there for the solution. Again, I don't care if he's 41, I don't care if he's 25. You have to put yourself in a position of, I'm here to learn because I want to move up. If you don't mention, this is a bit of a tangent, if you don't mention that you want to become a story producer or that you have a long-term goal, you can become really good at something and then stay there because no one knows you want to move up. If you treat the job like you're a receptionist at a car dealership and just come in and do a good job and go home, no one's going to promote you. You have to say, I want this. How can I learn from you? Or I just want to ask you a question about this because I know you're better at this than me, or you've done it longer than I have. Come in with a spirit of wanting to learn, not a spirit of entitlement, or I've read every book there is on screenwriting, so I know how to get us out of this.
Then this hypothetical guy, 41, comes in with an air of humility but inquisitiveness, and they make their intention clear but not overbearing about it.
Right, and there's a certain thing to be said for having confidence in your action. Don't look for a lot of reassurance, because while the train is moving, there's no time for people to stop and pat you on the head. I will, because that's how I manage, but there are a lot of people who have multiple shows going and don't have time and don't really acknowledge when you're doing well unless you ask. When I was first coming up, one of the things that I would do is I would ask for performance reviews from the people I was working with. What can I do to do a better job for you? Is there anything you've noticed that I might be more effective if I tried coming at something a different way? And just trying to just open a dialogue too. It enables you to develop friendships with the people who are above you, professional friendships. And it also establishes for them that you're somebody who has a desire for growth. And how can you not want to help somebody who is earnest about wanting to move up and move forward? All of us need to realize this is a broader thing. This is for film and television in general. One of the greatest gifts in my life is that I'm a member of something called the Caucus for Producers, Writers, and Directors. The people who are members in this organization are typically older than I am. They've been working, a lot of them, since the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. They've seen the business change. They know how much ground producers have lost. They know things that are important, and they have big picture things that they can tell you. They can give you advice you can't get from anyone else. The idea of, I'm going to come in and show them how great I am, that a lot of people who are new to any business have. If you forget to seek out a mentor, you've made a huge mistake. If you fail to take advantage of the interactions with the more experienced people above you, you are failing as a creative no matter what corner of the industry you're in. Seek out those people who know and learn from them. Don't come in, again, with that agenda that you're going to change the world and introduce something that no one has ever seen before, because we are in a business where a lot of it depends on the familiar. If something looks too bizarre or too outlandish, it's not accepted right away, it's a harder sell. And definitely if you're working in a collaborative environment, the idea that you're the rock star with the great ideas doesn't always work in a collaborative medium.
Can you give me some examples on how to maybe temper that? Because I think Generation Y, and then of course myself, Generation X, we've been taught sort of that, don't show any weakness kind of attitude, where maybe baby boomers are more willing to talk about things. So how can someone temper that if they have that in them?
Well, I would tell you I think that there's a difference between coming in and saying, I don't understand how this works, and coming in and saying, listen, I'm having a little bit of trouble with this thing here. In your experience, how have you dealt with this?
Got it. Okay.
That's not weakness. The seeking of knowledge is not weakness. Refusing to acknowledge your weaknesses is weakness.
Okay.
So you have to be able to go to people and say, I need a little bit of your understanding here. Got
it. What are the differences and also the similarities of film, sitcom television writing versus reality TV writing? How are they different? How are they the same?
All forms of television are the same in that you need to follow an acceptable structure. People need to understand what's happening, and you need to have a progression of action. That's the simplest part. If you're talking about sitcoms or dramas or reality shows, or in any, however they're supposed to come across, whatever the mood of the piece is, no matter what the tone is, every act break is going to have to give you something that's unresolved or that's going to make you want to come back from the break. Same deal in scripted, same deal in drama. It's harder to do in reality because naturally in life there aren't a lot of cliffhangers. It's one of the reasons why, when you talk about the difference, in reality television is the only genre on television that typically uses teasers or bumpers or shows you what's coming after the commercial, because we can't always end on that moment where you're waiting for something to happen. So we have to show you this thing that seems like a non sequitur at the time, where it's like the glass is breaking and someone's going like, Larry! Well, I want to come back because I want to know what that is. I couldn't end on the scene that ends sort of benignly at the end of the thing. We have to tack that on. Other real differences, I truly don't see very many. Story has the same components in reality that it has in scripted. The only difference is when you're missing a piece, you don't have the luxury of going ex nihilo and creating a situation from nothing, because your cast members, it has to be authentic to them. You sometimes have to figure out a way to tweak things that already exist in order to clarify a point or add some interview content to help you contextualize the material properly. But outside of that, again, it's all story. It's all the same.
I don't know if you're a huge fan of like the Up series, 57 and Up, and
of course,
Michael Apted. Can we talk about like the evolution of reality TV? Because some say that was the first real look at reality TV, but I think you were talking about other stuff that was even earlier.
I will tell you, and it's funny because I'm now working on something with someone who had worked on that first series.
Oh wow!
If you look back at reality television, it really started with, and because we're always expanding the definition of reality television. So now we've absorbed game and we've absorbed variety into the reality thing a little bit, where there are some reality competition shows where, well, you're winning a prize and you're competing, so is it a game show or is it a reality competition show? Using that as the yardstick, you would go back to Ted Mack's Original Amateur Hour, which was the first show on the air, even before Candid Camera. It came on the same year, but it beat it by several months. The Ted Mack's Original Amateur Hour was the very first. So a reality competition variety style show was the very first thing. After that, we got Candid Camera, which came from the radio series Candid Microphone, which started in 47 and then started on television in 48. You start moving forward and you hit certain marks like An American Family, which is 1973, if I'm remembering correctly. And it was very early. I think they shot it in 71 and it finally aired in 73. I could be wrong. I don't remember my dates exactly. That's when you start to see reality where you're actually just doing follows and you're seeing people interact with each other as sort of the precursor to the way that we have a lot of those types of shows like The Real World now. The Real World, of course, being its own big mark in 1992. You have Cops, which came out of the 1988 writers' strike, sort of as an answer to, well, what are we going to do when we have a show when we can't have writers on it, so we're going to make this thing. Cops was enormous, and then, you can still watch it. You have America's Funniest Home Videos, which I don't think anybody ever thinks about as a reality show because it's primarily it's a clip-based thing, but everything that's happening there is really happening. It's just documented reality clips that are being sent in, like things that are really happening to people. There's a business model I wish I would have thought of. Vin DeBona every day. I just think about that guy and how amazing he was to figure that one out. And then, of course, you hit 2000 and you start to see Survivor and those types of shows. It's constantly evolving, and the different types of shows are constantly, they're changing and new things are being introduced. We're hybridizing a lot of things now. So we have a reality competition show that's a little bit about this, but it's also got elements of this. So you have Big Brother, which is sort of like if you had competitions in a real world house where it was about you being eliminated. That's about the only thing that's different. We're just really continuing to grow and evolve and figure out who we are in reality. So there's a lot of stuff we haven't done yet. We're starting to get into that place where, again, I talk about it all the time because I can't shut up. Anthony Bourdain. It's one of the few examples I've seen of a reality show that is one person's voice throughout the show. He is on camera. He is writing all of his own material for that show. He's not, it's completely his voice in that show, which makes it better than so many things that are written by 15 layers of committee and everybody's kind of putting their 2 cents in, and you're writing host copy that may or may not be exactly how the host would normally sound. Beautifully done stuff. But we're going to continue to get better and evolve and make television that is not, as your earlier commenter posited, garbage.
Well, that's interesting because I remember back to the talk shows of the 90s. You had Jenny Jones and Montel Williams, and then all of a sudden the Jerry Springer and the Maury Povich started doing the really sensationalistic stuff. And it seems like now we're seeing that too. And forgive me, I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, so do you think we'll ever have stuff that has a higher purpose to it? That's maybe...
I think we have it now.
Okay.
I think you're not watching the right content.
Okay.
I think that actually the really malicious, mean-spirited prank shows, have you not noticed a decline in those?
Haven't watched.
I think people are getting a little bit tired of super negative, humiliating content.
So we've evolved.
I think we have. I think we've gotten past the part where just being awful is not, and as part of a spectacle, is kind of, those days are behind us.
Well, I know Morgan Spurlock did The Day in the Life, and he did one on Mark Maron. It was great.
Right.
Did one on Terry Guetta from Banksy. So he, that one had much more of a higher purpose because it was about these artists following their, day-to-day lives. So you think people are maybe done with some of the women pushing each other into a pool and saying mean things?
Well, I don't think that naturally occurring conflict is ever going to go away. What I'm talking about is a show where someone's sitting in a car and a guy dressed as a 6-foot-tall alien walks over a hill and rips the doors off the car and starts dragging people off into the night to the point where the person has to spend time in therapy. I think those shows are behind us because I think too much of it kind of made us numb and now we want something else.
Okay.
I'm not saying that the pendulum is swinging all the way back over to all we're going to be doing is super family friendly stuff.
Sure.
Because people still like conflict and people still like characters that aren't necessarily admirable. I talk about him all the time. Henry Jenkins, great media scholar. One of the things that he said was that he talks about the audience use of the character. You hear a lot of times that people are terrible role models in reality television. And like, who are you as a role model? Well, are you a role model or are you a cautionary tale? Are you a bad example that is not to be followed? In movies, we talk a lot. I mean, was very funny. I'm sorry. Now I'm the guy that goes back and starts talking over himself and not completing. I should have taken my 3 seconds. I was at an event last year. John O'Hurley, at the end of speaking to a group of people who were assembled at a very prominent film school, said at the end of his speech, he says, and the one thing I would tell all of you is, don't go into reality television. It's so negative, and it's like pulling the wings off of flies, and it's just a horrible... And I stood up in the middle of the audience and just stuck my arms out like I just was here for 2 days lecturing about how to get into reality television. People don't get that there's a lot of really great stuff, and I don't think that they use that label reality television for it. I think it's a documentary series, it's a this, it's a that. I'm sorry, it's reality television. It's reality television. Just because people aren't clocking each other over the head with pots or pans or whatever, it doesn't mean that you lose the label reality television. If the phrase reality television disappeared tomorrow and we started judging it as, factual or authentic or some other word, I think that people would get away from constantly damning the stuff that's a little bit more pronounced.
Well, I like what you said. Also, too, it could be an example of a cautionary tale. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be, well, this person's a great example, a pillar of their community. It could also be, well, this is what happens when, let's just take the example of Joe Millionaire, which is something I regurgitate all the time, but I love the show, and it got me back into watching TV for a short time. But it's a perfect example of, women fighting over a man and not really knowing who he was. They just thought he was one thing. And again, perfect example of maybe how people should sort of look at themselves. So obviously there's a market for this, because if, going back to what our person on Twitter said, how can you be a part of this? There's a market for it.
Yes. And I would also recommend to anybody who is interested in reality television, I'm not a defender of the low-end material. I don't just say, well, all reality television is fantastic. There is an incredible book that was written by a feminist media scholar. Her name is Jennifer Posner. The book is called Reality Bites Back. It's a real takedown of how we portray women in media, how we portray minorities in reality shows. One of the things I think reality shows do well is I think you find more cast diversity in reality television than you find in regular programming. The problem is a lot of the shows still, you have the whole princess myth is still all over the place. Like, oh, I just got to meet a man. If I could just meet a man. All the dating shows, it's the same thing. There's a lot that we can work on. And, Jennifer and I talk periodically about the things that we would like to see changed in reality television so that we can be a little bit more evolved and kind of get ourselves out of, those old stories. But in order to be involved, you have to, the old thing they say, vote with your remote.
Right. And obviously
follow the good stuff.
Troy, what is the most difficult part of producing a reality show?
The most difficult part of producing a reality show in the beginning is setting a tone for that show and understanding how that show is supposed to feel. Because what will happen is a network will commit to your show, they want to see it. If you're doing a show for USA, it's going to have a very specific feel. If you're doing a show for CBS, they have a different demographic. They want to hear what they want to hear. If you're doing a show for We or for OWN, everybody has their own laundry list of stuff that you have to be able to hit. You also are in this strange position where you need to create something that feels familiar, but is different enough that it stands apart from the other content on that network. So oftentimes, turning in the first episode is a real ordeal because you're really trying to figure out how to please the network, both creatively, as far as giving them something fresh and something new, and something that's also, on the other hand, familiar. As far as selling a reality show and getting a reality show to air, it's just a matter of trying to hit that sweet spot of what the network really needs. They don't always articulate what it is that they need. Very often you'll get a call or an email from your agent that says, so-and-so is buying this. You read the cable updates and you say, well, so-and-so bought a couple of these, shows about chefs. So I better start thinking about that space for that network because it looks like they're starting to do more cooking-oriented stuff, even though it's a channel that's never done that before. it's just trying to predict the need is very difficult. That's the other hardest thing as far as trying to sell something, is predicting what the needs are.
And sustaining that throughout the additional episodes.
Yeah. Trying to find a place to go in a show that isn't a particularly well thought out thing. There are a lot of shows that sell based on the idea of the show versus what you can actually execute. If I told you that I wanted to do a real life version of 30 Rock, and I was going to follow these writers in the writer's room, and it was going to be amazing. As a concept, that sounds like fun. It's like, hey, there's a bunch of funny people that work on a TV show, and I'm going to do a real life version of them in the writer's room. A writer's room is brutal, and it's just people working things out and batching stuff out and putting cards on the wall, and they're in one room, and they order all their food in because they don't have time to go out, and they're going to eat everything out of tins and solve problems and look at notes and complain about stuff, and it's not a show that's going to be super exciting and whiz bang and a lot of action. So as a concept, it sounds great. In practice, it doesn't.
Right, that $1 million napkin idea.
It's the $1 million napkin idea. Is if you can't execute it, it just don't even go there.
Right, interesting.
But sometimes you get saddled with what I was trying to say really was, sometimes you get saddled with a show like that where there's almost no way to get a positive outcome. Those shows are actually, in a way, a lot of fun because trying to figure out the solution, it's like the biggest Rubik's Cube ever.
So Troy, in your Full Sail University interview, your alma mater, you talked about being a weird kid, which I can identify with, and you said that it shaped you into having this creativity and this input that you now use on a daily basis. So talk about that and what you told me too about weird kids running the world.
In the Full Sail interview that I did in 2010, and I talked about having grown up and been a little bit weird, I was obsessed with old radio programs, older television shows, and just really fascinated with storytelling in general, comic books, just anything. You end up distancing yourself a little bit from your peers, and you get labeled a weird kid. I don't mind. I was a weird kid. I'm a weird adult. I care about what I do to a level where it is wholly distracting. My hobby is the same thing as my job. If I'm not creating, if I'm not working on a reality show somewhere, I'm at home trying to figure out how to do it, or I'm lecturing on reality TV, or I'm I'm completely wrapped around this one thing that I really have figured out that I loved. It's okay to be weird, because being weird is a manifestation of your passion for a particular thing at a level that other people cannot necessarily engage you at that level. You're excelling at one thing, and it's okay. It's okay to be weird. I told you earlier before we started this interview, weird kids run the world. People who are able to think in an unusual way or be overly analytical about things that people might think are throwaway. One of the greatest experiences I ever had, just recently I did a lecture at Story Expo. And when I got there, the organizer was like, you got to meet Sid Field. And I met Sid Field and talked about the book, and Sid was like, oh yeah, da, da, da. He goes, yeah, he says, I don't think people ever think about reality that way. And just the idea that Sid Field is acknowledging, yes, it's okay to be serious about something that people look at as a throwaway genre. Stuff matters. Doing it right matters. The people who are really, really good at it, you talk about J.D. Roth. J.D. Roth, he did, what was the show? Was called Black and White or something, where two families swapped races through makeup and interacted with their communities. Nobody would do that sort of stuff. It's too weird. But it was a great show. It's okay to care a lot about what it is that you do. Don't ever get into something because you think it's a lot of money. There are a lot of people that get into screenwriting, and then I hear them say, I always say, what do you think the median price is for a script? And you'll always hear people say, oh, it's $1 million. It's this, it's this. Okay, that's great. Even if you got $1 million for a script and it took you 5 years to break in and to kick the doors down, you've made a fifth of that. You've made $200,000 minus whatever your expenses were. Plus you had to live in LA, the most expensive city there is. You're not living a baller lifestyle trying to break into anything. Follow your passions. Allow that weirdness to inform you in a way that makes you unique within your profession. It's okay to be weird.
So if a weird kid and his parents said, you know what, can we go to lunch? We love, our child, but he's not socializing with the rest of the kids, and he really loves these dinosaur figures, and he loves the comic books and these things, and we want him to be, what would you tell them?
I tell anybody, indulge your kids' passions, because that's where their outlet is. If you're worried about them being able to integrate and act out with other kids, I can guarantee you there is no kid who is so weird that there is not another weird kid out there who kind of wishes they could meet that weird kid. You gotta let people be who they are. My own mother, I don't know how she and my father put me through art school and then film school, which I always joke is like the worst parenting you could ever have. Is it's just like, we're gonna help you get, a useless education, and then another one that's almost as useless, so that you can know everything there is about a total long shot profession. And if I'd have made a left turn in Albuquerque, I'd still be working at a pizza place or something. It's just that thing where, believe in your kids. Believe in your weirdness and believe that it'll pay off in some way.
So when did you realize that being weird was an asset?
I don't want to get too hung up on the word weird.
And I say it with the most love.
It's always an asset because I think that there are some people I know who take reality television as seriously as I do. They don't necessarily look at it as making widgets. They're really great storytellers. There are people I know that are like finalists in the Nicole Fellowship that end up in reality television, and they care about the story and they want it to work, and they get mad when they can't find the piece that goes in here. It'll work out. And again, it's a matter of if you don't care about what it is that you do, if you do it cynically, you're never going to create a product that's as good as if you're passionate about it. And just because I chose to run down a trail that's not screenwriting, which is glamorous, which is logical to want to pursue something that's glamorous, doesn't mean that I'm any less of a storyteller than anybody who's working in that genre, in that corner of the industry. I shouldn't say genre, that's not the word. Well,
sure, and I'm using the word weird in sort of a negative way, but really what I mean is someone that sort of thinks, and outside of the box is so cliche, somebody that's a little bit different from the herd, and that is hard growing up, but I think if you harness it in the right way, I think when you're an adult, it's a great asset.
I love the fact that there are kids that are bananas about science now. And I think that goes back to looking at people who are a little weird. Bill Nye. Weird dude, but you can credit him with there being an entire generation of future scientists, because that stuff hit people in a spot where it was okay to be smart and it was okay to chase science. And I would like to think that reality television can be bigger and better and more important than it is. That people can be informed by it in the same way that the people who followed after Don Herbert and Bill Nye and all those guys that did the science shows, and affected the community at large positively. And reality TV. The one thing I will say is you learn more from reality TV than you learn from a lot of other things. You learn how to fix your house, you learn how to landscape, you learn how to fix your car, you learn different ideas of how to handle things, a lot of the DIY channels and things like that. It's all about improving your own life, whether it's aesthetically or personally or you're starting over. Reality television has the ability to be really, really powerful. The stories that we tell can empower people. It's not all just entertainment. It's okay when it is just entertainment. But I think that we just need to continue to work harder to make a quality product so that people can take us seriously and not be mildly embarrassed to admit that they watch it.